The next speaker I would like to introduce is Mr. Ganesh Ramani, who has had a long career in investment finance as partner and global head of structured finance investing and lending at Goldman Sachs, and joins us today as trustee of the British Asian Trust. As a conservation philanthropist, he has a long-standing passion for wildlife and conservation, and has supported projects across the globe, including Lion Guardians and Elephant Family, two organizations working on improving the coexistence between wild animals and people. Today he will talk to us about human-wildlife conflict and coexistence from the donor's perspective. Welcome, Ganesh.
Thank you. Listening to Brian, I should say, instead of thinking about human existence, coexistence, I was thinking a lot about our marriage and conflicts and what donor organizations I need to potentially call, who we donate to, and what we can do, and how I basically tackled my conflicts with CEO as a trustee. So it sent me off in a bit of a tangent, but let me try to basically gather my thoughts. So I primarily think of myself as just a donor, pure donor, and representing a donor organization. We try to basically support organizations in its various growth. We've tried to fund projects. And I just wanted to basically say, as a person who's never lived with wildlife, why the fascination and what basically brought me here. I would say I grew up in a city, absolutely saw no wildlife, and thankfully did not have a TV, and we were allowed to just watch one movie a year, and most of those movies turned out to be wildlife documentaries. The first 5 movies I saw, 3 or 4 of them were wildlife documentaries, and then an obsession with animals. So I come into this already detecting my own bias is towards animals, came in with a love of animals, and with the view that probably humans were a necessary evil to be tackled. That perspective will, I'm surely, change after Brian's talk, and in terms of I have a lot of soul searching to do. As a donor, my journey started 15 years ago. Loved animals. I need to basically figure out a way I can help and be part of this particular process. So tried finding the easiest solutions possible. A lot of big organizations talked about macro needs and what needs to be saved and what needs to be done, working in hundreds of landscapes. So that journey basically led me to start giving money to and which were kind of fairly significant to a lot of these organizations. Over time, then, you start developing a curiosity. There was not enough time or research done. There was a curiosity as to what are the efforts actually being done in this particular process. And there was, with a lot of the organizations as a donor, you did not get much of a response. So you had to drop some and then, figure out what is the next step in this particular part of being a donor and the journey of being a donor. Got attracted easily to big visions, large landscape, great solutions, which seem to be a cure-all, and always basically attracted to very charismatic people who are doing that. So as a donor, that was the next step in the journey. Till one stage you realize a 10-year vision to double a certain population of certain species. And we are into year 9, and we have no numbers, we have no data prior or past. So that journey of disappointment led to quitting my job the first time around, retiring, taking an early retirement to actually go and visit some of the projects and visit a lot of the projects. What you then do realize is there is not a panacea. People basically doing a lot of hard day-to-day work, trying to figure out solutions, Some of them basically are lucky and they become very famous, but each one of those small projects, important in a very individual way. Met a couple of very inspiring organizations and inspiring people in that particular process, which led me a desire to basically stay. And I would like to mention, obviously, people mentioned Lion Guardians, Sanjay Gubbi in India, two people who inspired me to basically stick to the course. Then I thought, obviously, I can't do this on my own, so I have to do it with help from an organization. And in that process, I met my wife. So luckily, basically got married as part of this journey, so reinforced my desire to stay the path. As time went on, I think, in terms of a lot of what I realize, and as Brian pointed out, it is like, what if you basically are in Yugoslavia and you crash a Croatian crashing into a Bosnian car? And that, I realized, was the journey of basically the relationship between a donor and a conservation organization on the ground. So the first is reliability, donors. We have a tendency to chase new and exciting things, how we sound cool in a bar talking about the projects we fund. So we chase success and are impatient for it. We don't stick a course, stick to our, and so by definition, the organizations don't have any desire to be too transparent with us as a donor. Duration. So as part of our thinking now, any project we decide to fund, at least I think in my head that I need to be able to fund it for 5 years. And I need to provide that assurance that we will stay the course. Acceptance of failure. Because without that, there is no adaptability to various projects we fund. And that implies, as a donor organizations, how do we ensure our donors basically stay the course? 2, while I did say that I chase charisma and like big visions because they are easy to raise money to, but when you look for a snake oil salesman, you get snake oil, right? And that's the, in terms of most of these are built, and we don't fund what was basically a success in the past, because coexistence is a continuous problem. It's a continuous issue. There is no peace at the end of it. It is living with conflict and basically managing that particular process. Every day is not glorious. So the next step is that acceptance of failure, and that we encourage the organizations to be basically more transparent with us. Then, moving on, ego. We as donors tend to have been successful. Thankfully, I was not very successful, so didn't have that particular problem in my career. But most donors tend to be fairly successful people. And their own egos basically get in the way. They feel that they can get themselves put into a certain situation and can be very prescriptive. So we make organizations sometimes run as if we are the heroes of the situation. Unfortunately, we are not. We have to recognize that the people on the ground who do the slog are actually the heroes and have to be treated as such, in which case it actually endears them to you or makes them at least trust you. Instead, if you are basically the hero of the situation, you will just hear the story you want to hear. The next, in terms of as part of this journey, one of the things, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought. The fourth part is, historically we've found struggle because a lot of the organizations are small. We struggle to encourage collaboration. When we funded 2 or 3 projects, talking positively about one project to another and say whether this could be applicable in their case, it always basically raised the hackles. Everyone was worried about cannibalization. They were afraid of losing basically this donor to another particular organization. So collaboration has historically been very difficult, with conservation being each person ran fiefdoms in terms of if they were big in a certain area. I do basically think that there is a big positive change in that. One of our basically projects we fund now, Coexistence Consortium, and I don't think the donor, in terms of the receiving organization, would be thinking very high positive thoughts about us, because we did make their life very bit difficult. We could not basically trust, given our past history of, I think most of the projects we funded in our life, we have failed, right? In terms of, because we didn't spend the necessary time to develop the understanding which was historically in the past. We always look for impact, results. We were focused more on what the end result was, without paying an adequate interest and understanding in what the process and the ethos behind the conservation is. So, a lot of times, the people who were sometimes successful came at possibly cost of communities which were basically living in that area. That realization now basically says, as a donor, it is not just about the money, it is how much time and understanding we can develop over time. That is basically critical to being a good donor. The next element, we are not dealing with just projects. We are dealing with people working on the ground. And they basically have a lot of tasks to do, and one of the irritating tasks they have to do is basically keep planning their financing a lot more than a normal organization would do. We have to be cognizant of their mental health. A lot of people sacrifice their relationships, working in such high-stressed situations. They sacrifice their mental health and sometimes put even their own personal health at risk. So, as a donor, to ensure that we do achieve basically the impact we want to achieve, it is important for us to focus on an all-round picture rather than just bottling it down to, hey, the conflict numbers were 10,000 and probably came down to 2,000 this particular quarter. That, I think, is again something which we have learned over time. Last, in terms of all of us go through our careers in a corporate world, you very rarely get to rest on your own legacy because there is someone to fire you. However, in the conservation world, and especially this is like founder-led organizations, it is succession planning. We need to encourage people to basically do, as a donor, figure out what the planning is from a succession perspective. If a US president can serve 2 terms and can be displaced, in terms of we have to basically encourage founders to move on to the next stage of their lives, and we need to facilitate that. They could basically help the donor organization or be part of a donor organization. A wise person said, a lot of organizations have become very successful at delegating responsibilities, but not delegating power. So the owner basically, the founder basically becomes quite an indispensable person, and then they lose the promising talent below them. So as a donor, it is imperative on us to think about the only value we bring to the table is telling their story. We are not the hero in this story. We are just a funder. And what we can do is bring our experience as a human to that particular situation. I should say that I think probably 80% of my donations have been practically to people who didn't deserve it, who I funded documentaries which were even I couldn't bear to watch even one time. But that, I think, is again money doesn't basically compensate for time and understanding. And that, I think, is like the overriding message. Now, I always basically say to conservationists, whether they are the only true heroes in this particular situation, it is the community, and we have taken a long time to basically realize at the center of the coexistence problem or an issue is the communities who learn to live with it. They basically not just give up a few assets, it's not as they lose potentially their livelihoods and their lives. It was heartening to basically see in India when we were traveling that we were told, oh, that tiger, oh, it's just killed 3 people and we're walking around with its cub. The fact that the tiger is living and could breed a cub is a testament to the people who live around it. And here, at the same time, we are talking to a donor who says, oh, loves elephants, loves tigers, would love to support. Oh, by the way, a coyote attacked his pet. He hired a hunter and went and killed 15 coyotes in retaliation. That is, we as donors, where we live, we have to respect what the communities basically go through and how little our tolerance is. And as Brian says, if we put ourselves in that same situation, how much our tolerance would be. So I know that there is no peace at the end of it. It is all a process. And we, in terms of his Elephant Family British Asian Trust, we endeavor not to be very big, but that we basically are there for the organizations we support, and we stay consistent and reliable and take care of the people who we fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Ganesh, for the lovely talk, and opening it up to questions. There's one.
Yeah, thank you very much. You said accepting failure. How much failure can we accept? Where's the threshold? When do you have to say this is enough?
Yeah, he's here.
I think that's, if someone is basically running a business, we do accept failures. Things never go according to plan. I think it is adherence to process and see whether the person is adaptable, whether they learn from the failures and there is an adaptation. If the attitude is basically we are going to try the same thing which hasn't worked 3 times or 10 times and the person does not have a different idea, you then basically, as any business, you would basically say, we don't want to go along with it. But as donors, in terms of when we spend little time, all we check is our quarterly reports or the processes. You fill out these forms and we evaluate that. We have to basically be more like a venture capitalist who sits and tries to understand the business and whether there is a corrective course. If we are not part of the process, and so I think there is no single answer to it. Obviously, if the person fails consistently and always it's the wrong approach, and there is quite a lot of conflict or increased conflict, there is no effect, that is a problem. But I do think patience is necessary. I don't think it's consumers are the community and the wildlife. And if they are adaptable, we give them a chance. So I think instead of basically cutting off funding after 1 year, I always say basically give it at least 2 or 3. I don't know whether it's a conflict or whether I'm getting a call on my phone.
Can you explain the photograph behind you?
It is one of the projects we fund very dear to our heart, and I basically think our role is as storytellers of the communities which live around with the wildlife, which is a constant source of conflict. These elephants were created by the Adivasi community in Gudalur, near Gudalur in India. They live with these elephants, they lose their crops, some have lost lives, but they know each one of the elephants so well. And it was created out of the invasive lantana weed. And to me, I'm not moved by art. A lot of people were moved by the elephants. I wasn't. But when I went to Gudalur recently, the biggest change was getting the story out. You know, obviously these elephants were sold for a lot of money in the UK. It is they becoming entrepreneurs. It is translating their knowledge and what they can do and give them basically an audience here. And what we wanted to do, hopefully, is influence our own thinking about coexistence and what we need to do to support them more.
Thanks for the presentation. I think a lot of, I'm coming from an academic background, and I think a lot of academics are burdened with a lot of their time, especially as they move up, toward professorships and things. They spend a lot of time grant writing. And I've heard some conversations about trying to shift that workload toward specific staff that have that role, but hearing you talk and hearing the emphasis on the time spent really gathering information and a better understanding about a project before deciding to fund it. I guess I'm just curious about your perspective and what you think in terms of a path moving forward where maybe you can still get that quality of information about a project, but rather than it coming from maybe the expert themselves, it's coming from someone who works closely with them. I don't know, just what are your thoughts on a path in that direction?
For us, given that our emphasis is on succession planning and basically giving the time most to the person, they should be doing what they do best rather than wasting all the time with the donors, and that's not our objective. We don't care who the conveyor of the information is, as long as it's verifiable and consistent. The only thing we do value is the relationship with the person as an individual, because a lot of these organizations have 2 or 3 key people. And so there has to be some time spent into just like with the overall well-being of the person. That is quite important to us as a donor. Right, in terms of, because it is a key person risk with a lot of these organizations. So I don't necessarily want to burden their time basically answering questions which could be answered by someone else, but it is important for us to basically be in touch with the key people in every organization.
Maybe one more quick question before we end the session. Yeah.
I also work for a founding NGO, and I was wondering what are your strategies to make these grants more accessible for practitioners? Just picking on the question before, sometimes coming from Latin America, just not knowing English makes people not interested in spending time in grant writing. And I know this is an issue that it's being recognized between funders, but I'm curious to hear if there's any sort of solution for that coming from other parts of the world.
It's an excellent question. We've historically been always biased by people who write the best proposals rather than the best work which is done on the ground. That has been a historic bias. I know that you just came back from a trip to Argentina to look at Rewild Argentina. Look, we have to basically then make the necessary investment in terms of taking the right person along, right? That we need basically an intermediary. I think the quality of work, once we start understanding the work, speaks for itself. I don't think language then becomes a barrier, but it is the inertia, the initial inertia of getting across. And we are trying to make that effort. And what we have tried to do, we have set up two things, whether the Coexistence Consortium and the Coexistence Fund. Even when we think of even projects in India, historically we basically funded people who are urban oriented, that they can talk the same language, they take the same speak, make the same speak. It has disadvantaged people from the community, right? Like, in terms of who speak for the community, because they can't basically speak. So what we have tried to do in terms of bridging the gap is have an advisory group which is more representative, that acts as an intermediary. We have tried to basically improve by basically increasing that. Their job is not to write the best proposals. Our job is to translate the information into the proposal we require. I don't think we believe in putting the burden on the organization, as long as we can basically find the right people who makes us the introductions. So I think we will basically spend the resources to make it more accessible. But it is a historic bias which we have been guilty of. We funded people who basically wrote the best proposals.
Thank you, Ganesh,
Thank you.
for a lovely talk.